Yes, our reading today comes from St. Francis of Assisi, the patron saint of animals and ecology, and apparently merchants as well, which seems like a funny addition to me. And I thought it was an interesting one because it is often called the reading, the canticle of the creatures, and yet most of it touches on humanity and sun and moon, and it mentions animals in there. But Saint Francis, according to the Catholic Church, had a deep respect and love for all those things, especially animals and the embodiment of spirit all around us. So it makes sense that he covered all his bases. In one of the few writings we actually have from him, there are a lot of stories, many of which include him preaching to animals he runs into on his journeys. I heard one where he preaches to these sparrows or birds, and they all stop chirping to listen. And until he dismisses them, they don't fly away, and they do all this interesting interaction during it. And I don't know if I'm quite on that leg of my journey. I don't think I've been preaching long enough to keep birds enthralled. But I think that there's something to be said about respecting the light, the spirit in animals like St. Francis. And of course, today we're reflecting especially on those loved ones, those family members we often call our pets. I don't need to tell you, if you've had a dog or a cat or pretty much any pet, that they bring so many blessings to our lives. And so today we will have a blessing of the pets, but I think for our reflection, we're going to largely just celebrate the blessing of pets, the huge love and comfort and ultimately presence that they bring into our lives. I think that's maybe the most overlooked thing. We all know our dogs are great when we're feeling down, that they're there for us, that they love us unconditionally for the most part. But that presence in those moments, I think, is something it's easy to overlook. It's easy to overlook in ourselves, that centeredness on silence, so to speak, on the vastness of spirit that the Lord often invites us to. I think our pets embody. When no one's knocking at the door, at least for Ghost, she often embodies just gentleness of play and most especially just being present. And I think we naturally learn from our pets in that way. We look at them, we say, well, you don't have a phone, you're not doing this or that. And look at you, you're at peace. Now we can twist it around and say, well, what do you have to worry about? I feed you every day. I house you. But that's what God tells us, right? God tells us that, yes, you've toiled so hard. You are really hard on yourself often. But it's truly me who provides these things, even that power to get up in the morning, to work, to go do your job is from me. I'm your consciousness. I'm all strength and useful form. And so don't worry like the animals don't worry, like your pets typically don't worry. And so I think that presence in the house is very healing. And so there's a good reason why the studies show pet owners live decent amount longer, statistically significantly longer than non-pet owners. I don't know how long it takes to see that impact if you've had a dog for 2 years, maybe. But I think it makes sense, and it makes sense because of that life that they bring. I mean, they get us outdoors, they get us walking. You know, we have to chase the cat around for whatever reason. They keep us on our toes often. We got to watch where we step. I know I do have to watch where I sit. I'll kill the cat. In fact, I've been worried about that before, And so there's something about pets being around that brings some presence into our lives. A lot of different things that do that. So I feel like, in a way, they preach to us. Just their presence preaches to us, just as you all preach to me and each other with your wisdom and your presence and your love and dedicatedness. All the things you bear, all the ways that you shine divinity, it shouldn't be underestimated, just like with our pets. Indeed, God would say we should value ourselves, and love each other as much as the most well-loved pet. Easier said than done, God. Easier said than done. But living into that practice, I think living into that presence that pets often embody, helps us reconnect with our intrinsic compassion. Because if these scriptures are right, from the Bible to many others, we are naturally loving in our connectedness with God. All our gifts are from God, our consciousness, our life. When we reconnect with awareness and self instead of all this judgmental, ruminating thought, doesn't like being in the moment, it's going into the future, it's bringing in the past, judgments, fights with the moment. Not everything's right about this moment. I don't like this and that. And often it's just a feeling like things are wrong. I know I can have it. Doesn't matter what's going on. It's just like, some struggle. And I think sometimes it's there and it's hard to notice because it's part of us. We think it is anyway. And so becoming aware of that, having presence for ourselves, not, dismissing it or shooing it away exactly, but having some presence with it. Okay, I notice that I feel this way. It's interesting. I notice I can be fearful of what people think. Interesting. You can ask yourself, why is that? You can be curious. But then reconnecting with those greater truths that St. Francis shared, that God shares in our lives in many different ways, that we are one with divinity, one with each other, even if we do everything in our power to make it seem like we're not. We've convinced ourselves. We've never known better. And I think our pets, just in that joy they have to connect with us and to connect with their environment, it reminds us of that kind of truth. It's not a truth that you have to really think about all the time, but I think it does invite us to let go of the non-truths that we often center in. That sense of division, of judgment, of pain. Sometimes finding the roots of those things help to heal it as well. And noting that our society hasn't always held space for us. Even the most privileged of us, whatever that may mean, are carrying the burden of a society that abuses, that has abused at least. This last week we commemorated Canada's National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. And it's a stark reminder of the harm and divisive torture that we can cause as human beings. Even under the guise of church. Often it has been under the guise of religion. To dominate, because people connect with these texts, connect with faith leaders, because of the health that they often engender. There is a lot of, I think, renewal and health to be found in these scriptures often. And then we're in a tradition, and then the next minister comes along, or we switch churches, or maybe that first one didn't always have the best intentions. And things get twisted. We tend to use the tools at our disposal for what we're about, and it can often be control and dominance and judgment and all those things. And yet the indigenous people of Canada, of the Americas, who've suffered under so much genocide, are some of the wisest peoples that you can meet. The spiritualities in many of those cultures still invite us to greater health, connectedness with animals and our natural environment. To realize that we are one in them, with them, in God. And we shouldn't treat others as separate. We should love them as ourselves, as Christ said. And I think pets help with that. We tend to love our pets like ourselves. We tend to treat our pets kind of like ourselves too. So when we're not very loving to ourselves, sometimes we're a little tough on our pets. And so there's many lessons that they teach, that God teaches through them. Indeed, like how the indigenous people look at the world as deeply connected with the Great Spirit, Emanuel Swedenborg, the renowned spiritual author, although he was more famous for his science in his day, and the inspiration for the name of our church, although he didn't start a church, also believed that animals were embodiments of divinity, just like we are, that they pointed to God, not a full, shining embodiment, infinite and yet infinitely small, the thing, the substance that gives form and substance to all things, but an image of it, something that points to it, that helps remind us of it, and in deep connection with it. One thing I don't exactly see eye to eye with Swedenborg on is that he didn't always believe, or he never seemed to believe, that animals went to heaven. He thought that they were a little bit closer to the source, so to speak, and that as they died, they were still part of God. In a way, it kind of connects to me with reincarnation. Most reincarnative spiritualities actually believe in a heaven, whether it's called the Buddha fields, the Pure Land, two different names for heaven in Buddhist traditions. Hinduism has many names for heaven. And so I think it's interesting to note that in those reincarnative spiritualities, there is a heaven where you live forever and you get to know your divine connection with God forever. But until you're ready for it, you go through different incarnations. So maybe that's why Swedenborg didn't see pets in heaven. Maybe they were still doing their thing up the channel or sideways. Although it is sometimes hard to imagine that Ghost isn't wiser than I am. And so that invitation to just see divinity around us a little more is important for our own sake, so we can relax a little bit. Knowing that we are eternal, that presence, that awareness knows that. As you meditate or pray or contemplate and let those thoughts come and go like clouds instead of following and identifying with them so much or fighting them, I think we find that. We find our confidence in naturally knowing we're eternal. So you don't have to take my word for it. Just lean into meditation. They say watching your pets is kind of like being in the woods because they're so natural. You can watch a person too if they let you. But just meditating on our pets can be like going into the woods because they're just so connected. And the human form, the animal form, is natural itself. But letting go of that divisive mindset as you do. And seeking what the Buddhists, if I may end on this, call bodhicitta. That compassion for all beings is one with us, and a hope and a striving for the enlightenment of every single person. Which is almost word for word what Swedenborg thought God was about and what the Bible invites us to. Now let's take a moment. Celebrating our pets and all the other ways that God speaks to us, invites us to our intrinsic godliness, that image and likeness that we're made out of, that we're made into. turning to our breath, kind of like our thoughts, hard to control all the time. And opening ourselves to appreciation and also action today. Perhaps it's political action, working with ecosystems, as some of you do so wonderfully. Noting that some of our practices, eating livestock from certain sources, isn't always the healthiest, can be torturous for the animals. Allowing God's compassion for all beings, ourselves included, to wrap around us just as God always does, with divine love and warmth.
Asleep in the stable, backs on the table, and tools at his ankles. Forged in the fire, letters in iron, scar-bearing rider. And up with the sunrise, he unveils his eyes, the world at his side. The sea of strangers, she searches among them, seeing his face in everyone beside her. In the sea of performers, she searches among them for the put on her shoes for her, unbraided her hair, and walked her down to the fair. In the heat of the spotlight, blue shadows on white, she was a sight. And higher the sun rose, he gave her water from a garden hose, and kissed her wet nose. In the sea of strangers, she searches among them, seeing his face in everyone beside her. In the sea of performers, she searches among them for the wild took off her shoes for her, and he braided her hair. Another day at the fair. He watched her round ribs rise like a barrel of wine, deep, heavy sighs. He hung up her saddle, finished the handle, and blew out the candle. Asleep in the stable, wax on the table, and tools at his ankles. He's the one